Mark Bentham.
And I'm Graham Nichols.
And I'm Katie Holloway, and you are listening once again to Ordinary. Happy. Oh, we need a theme tune. That would be fun.
Ordinary. There we go. That's it for now.
Lovely. Yeah. You just have to sing it every week.
I'll get my son to do us one. He'd love that.
Oh, he did a lovely song for Holiday Bible Fun.
There we go.
My kids loved it. But each sang me a different tune, but they remembered the Bible verse.
That's the key bit.
We used to have jingles, but we're having a jingle holiday at the moment.
A jingle-free podcast.
Jingle holiday, isn't that Christmas?
For all those of you who don't like the jingles, we're jingle-free and advert-free.
Yeah,
I'm trying to close my door, so my door isn't a distraction, but now I've become a distraction by closing my door.
I was distracted by the bicycle helmet that I spotted there, actually, and wondered who'd been cycling and where to.
I think it was a scooter helmet.
Oh, it might be.
And it wasn't me, it was one of my grandchildren.
Oh, well.
I don't have a scooter. I don't have the balance for a scooter.
You should have a scooter. You can get a three-wheel scooter, Graham. I can
get an electrified scooter.
Ooh,
I've seen parents with electric ones. I quite fancy one.
Yeah, no, there's a particular parent that goes up to St Wilfrid's I have seen.
Yeah, probably the same one that I've seen. But yeah, it'd be quite good. I'm doing a lot of extra walking these days, so it would be it'd be nice, I think. Anyway, you're both all right on this fine Tuesday in March. We've made it to March.
All good so far. All good.
Yeah, I've had some new window panes fitted, so I've opened my blinds just to enjoy them.
Nice.
Because they were all steamed up. So I think that's why I'm in a t-shirt, because I feel like it's raining, but it's summer. It feels bright, like there's a fair amount of daylight going on.
You're wrong though.
Yes, it's not summer.
There's definitely been a bit of snow today.
Yeah.
And it's cold. But other than that, Graham, it's really close.
It's all about the psychology. It's warm in the house, and it's light, and it's bright. The sun is definitely higher than it was in January.
You're right, and it's summer in Australia. So it's not like it's not summer anywhere, is it?
No.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
But that's a whole new song.
Yes.
Yeah, great. All right, let's go into it. We are... tomorrow, I believe, is International Women's Day.
Is that right?
I believe so. I think it might be tomorrow, March the 8th.
It's an International Men's Day then as well.
Is that the other 365 days of the year? I don't know. That is what many people would argue, I think, the people who are doing International Women's Day. My first question then, is it appropriate or helpful or good for Christians to celebrate or get involved with International Women's Day?
Yes, Graham, what do you think?
Yeah.
That's a really tricky question. I think probably only with caution.
Yeah.
I think not is a bit too emphatic. We should not get involved in it. I think feminism and International Women's Day and all sorts of things are kind of bound up. They're not purely celebrating womanhood, which I think is possibly worth celebrating. The reason I'm even qualified about that is whether it kind of
possibly
whether it distinctly needs celebrating as opposed to manhood, boyhood, girlhood, housewifehood. There's kind of lots of states and roles that need celebrating, and whether singling out one is particularly helpful at all for a Christian.
Yeah.
But I think the International Women's Day is probably more about a particular equality agenda that Christians, I don't think, sign up to fully. I think there is a good Christian equality agenda, but I don't think that's what feminism has generally been about.
Yeah, I did a bit of research yesterday on International Women's Day because I was just curious where it came from. Did you know it started in 1908? It's an aged celebration, if it's a celebration. Initially, it was about equality, so it wasn't necessarily feminism initially, but it was to do with votes for women, which I think as Christians, presumably, I've never asked this question, but presumably we want women to be able to vote. So initially good, I think. And more recently, it then had a kind of a detour it's going down, celebrating women's achievements some of which I think good to recognise and celebrate. In the same way that not more than you would celebrate men's achievements, but just celebrate them as much as. And then more recently, things like period poverty and the gender pay gap have been big things that they're kind of campaigning for. And I think lots of these things are good things that we want to, we want to make sure everybody's paid fairly, right? And that people can afford products that they need and things. So where, maybe Mark, you could answer this, where might we get tripped up in our thinking in those kinds of issues?
Well, so I guess it's what the agenda is before, behind it is, because at the end of the day, the Bible is hugely for women, hugely for justice, hugely for equality. So all of those things are biblical principles that we'd want to engage in. And over the years, the Christian faith has actually probably been the leading faith in terms of seeking to, uphold women, esteem them, equality, made in the same image. But it's where there's a political agenda behind it, I think is where we want to be careful. And often where it slides into is to the detriment of men. So in the sense of we stop to lose the distinctions between men and women, and where equality means the same rather than actually equal but different. And I think they're the kind of, it's the nuance, which I don't think the world sees. I think the world does hold, although interestingly the current culture is beginning to say, hold on a second, there is something different, but maybe not in the same ways. And I think often that potentially maybe an area where we can fall afoul. Yeah,
that's helpful. I wondered if as well, particularly a feminist agenda might be, perhaps the main issue with it is it often, or at least seems to pit women against men. Rather than, it's not a lot of the time not even saying equality, but maybe women are better. But I think there are many strands of feminism, and some feminists would kind of go that, women are better than men, we don't need men, whereas some are more like we should be equal to, or some are the same as, or some, I know Christians who would say they're feminists in that they would say that their view that women are equal but different to men is still a feminist view. Have you got thoughts on that, Graham?
I'm not sure that's a meaningless term because you haven't really defined feminist. To say women are equal in created status and in redeemed status is a biblical view. That's not really a feminist view. That's just a human anthropology, correct human anthropology view. I think trying to label it a feminist view is distinct because there isn't a masculinist kind of ideology that you can even pit it against. I think that those things can be a bit misleading. Can I just ask you a really stupid question? I think I know the answer, but just to be clear, what is period poverty? Just the fact that women have to pay for medical products in order to cater for their periods once a month. Is that what period poverty means? Yeah,
it's the idea that so much of the world, less so here, but more increasingly here in places like the UK and the US, but many women can't afford those products. They have to choose between eating and buying like sanitary supplies and things. Right, and particularly in certain countries in Africa, it's that actually that girls can't go to school for 1 week in 4 because they need to stay at home while they're bleeding. So that would be that kind of thing. And I think as Christians we would want to say that's not okay. But it's all, lots of these things, lots of good things that you would want to say we want to support poverty of any kind get wrapped up in this kind of feminist thing. And I wonder if it's helpful to separate them out, or I don't know.
Well, I think let's come for the other angle for a moment, which is
for a period.
That'd have been a whole new thing, wouldn't it? different use of word, is that actually let's also state that actually part of the reason why there is an International Women's Day is because women have been treated appallingly. And there has been, over the years, and even within the church, appalling behaviour, treatment of women where they have been belittled, where they have been, cast aside and not treated with the value, dignity that the Lord has given. And so I think there is a sense whereby when it's like a pendulum swings so far the other way that it then becomes, it starts working against itself. But actually, I think we have to recognise that there is still at times wrong treatment of women. There's a whole misogynistic kind of emphasis to stuff at times. Now we don't want to, and I think we have to state that. But then you have to begin to work straight lines. Okay, what does that look like? What does it really truly look like to be equal but different? What does it truly look like to encourage women and encourage men? What does it look like to, where's that best worked out and seen?
Yeah.
I think as well, period poverty is poverty, just having its expression in a particular expense, if you like, for women. And it's, to sort of untangle it a little bit, it implies that the woman is this kind of isolated individual who is suffering this poverty, not part of a family, who collectively are taking responsibility for this poverty. So I think there are, even in that, which seems on the face of it obvious, yes, of course we'd want women to be able to buy sanitary products and to be able to afford them, across the world. I think it's more complex than that. When you start to sort of dig into what are we actually saying, and I think, whilst totally agreeing that it's not a good thing that people couldn't afford sanitary products, I think it's also thinking about what's the family community responsibility for that, not just kind of what's this individual suffering and why does the state have to sort of solve it or the rest of the world have to solve it.
But you could see how the argument would go. The reason that the poverty is there is because the men in the family are not therefore caring or seeing that as a priority.
Yeah. And
creating the poverty. Hence why you need to uphold the rights and put it as if this is an issue. So I think that the wider family issue is, but I can imagine there are contexts where actually it's the men who are kind of not actually helping in that situation to provide as they should do.
And it's such a taboo as well. Like even I feel a little bit like, okay, I'm talking about this with you two men now here on air, whatever we are, on recording, and that is in the UK in 2023, actually. So you can see in other cultures that even to say to your husband, dad, uncle, the men in your family who provide, I need some money for this, must be harder in some situations.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that something that only will affect half the population does become a bit divisive or politicized, or, even in terms of charity work, let's raise money for these people in poverty, whatever culture that is. It does seem to have an agenda, possibly because of the gender difference of it.
Yeah, and I think we might get some response to all this, or I might get some, but I think that interdependence between, generally speaking, of men and women, and particularly men and women in households, is diluted or even just actually blasted out of the water in some feminist thinking and some ways of just categorizing a woman as, broadly speaking, an isolated individual who may or may not be married, but they're kind of a total individual in their own right. And obviously there's an excessive unbiblical idea that the wife or the daughter is a goods and chattels kind of idea, which I don't think is biblical at all, possession and so forth. But I think to just say there's two individuals who are not really interdependent, they just kind of marry and have this sort of convenient contract between them, but they're basically sort of competing equals is very unbiblical as well. And I know it's kind of old fashioned. I mean, it's beyond my generation, that the kind of man stay at home woman stay at home, man be the breadwinner. You know, that wasn't even my generation. That was my parents' generation. And yet there is something to it that I don't think needs to be should be completely jettisoned. Yeah, we could talk more about that, but anyway, just to put it out there, because I think there is something about responsibility for a household that a man should take, which is not saying he should be the breadwinner and a woman shouldn't go out to work. You know, my own wife has been working the whole of my life, not the whole of my life, the whole of my married life, in some way or other. You know, part-time, full-time, various. So I'm not at all of the idea that the women shouldn't do paid work. I'm very happy if they don't do paid work, but I'm happy either way. But that idea that I have a particular responsibility to nurture and care, I think shouldn't be lost. It's not quite an equal responsibility in that sense.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that, Katie.
I agree. There's so many threads we could go down, but I was thinking about feminism, and I was wondering if feminism has actually robbed women of a lot of choice. So I know lots of women who actually would like the choice to not work, but actually back 50, 60 plus years ago, when it became a bit more women can be in the workplace, now it's women should, because when women weren't in the workplace generally, a man's salary had to be enough to support family because the women were expected to be at home. Now women are expected to be in the workplace, perhaps. And actually men's salaries, I think, have dropped, at least in real terms, in terms of inflation and what they can buy. So actually now women who previously might have had the choice, I could stay at home or I could work, now are kind of being forced into working because the men aren't able to provide a income for a whole family unless they are in a particularly, well-paid job. Yeah.
And actually, I think not just forced, I think it burdens sometimes with guilt. The sense of, particularly if they have children, young children particularly, the sense of having to suddenly put them into care for some, it just then provides a sense of guilt. This is not what the ideal, but we have to. Now that's not true for everyone, but I think what you're saying is we're seeing. I mean, I think that is a reality, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I felt it massively. And the slight injustice that you're working to pay for the childcare as well, that, it's, I don't know, injustice is maybe a bit strong, but it does feel quite, I often have wanted to shake my fist at the feminists and be like, see what you're making me do.
But I think it's true of finance and of sexual freedom, actually, that a number of the things kind of won by feminists has actually ended up working against them. That women now have the sort of worst of all worlds, although they have, in a sense, sexual freedom, sexual independence, financial independence, career independence. They're less cared for. They're more vulnerable. They are actually end up getting the worst of both worlds in the sense that they end up doing the majority of childcare. Statistically, women still do the majority of childcare and have to work. And so there's kind of, you're thinking, unless you're an academic writing about this topic and earning your money that way, you didn't gain anything much from this process.
Yeah.
Actually, I think there's another group who have been harmed by it that is often not spoken about, and I'm going to be controversial, but I think actually young men, particularly, are now seeing the effects of that, because actually what we don't quite know what to do is how to deal with young men and what we're training them to be like. So we've lost that distinction often between man and women, and now we don't quite know what a young man should be like, and I think we end up feminizing the guys rather than actually creating and helping them to actually be men who are respectful of women, who care for women, who sacrificial, who love, who protect, who all of those who do lay down their lives. But we slightly lost hold of what that is because the pendulum's gone the other way, and there's a sense of we must become all the same, and actually it's swung towards that feminist softer, and we've lost the sense of what it is to be men. And so what you're seeing now is people like Andrew Tate, an absolute misogynist, and the young guys are looking to him because he suddenly looks like someone, that's what we should be like, because we've lost the actual, what does it look like to be an actual man, because the pendulum's gone so far the other way.
So what can we do in churches then to try and address or help some of this? You've got the kind of the younger men who are not sure quite what it looks like to be a man or to take responsibilities, or even what responsibilities they should have. Like younger married couples or younger single people who might get married, like what might my role be in? But then you've got the kind of the young families who financially it's a struggle, and kind of everyone's got to work. I almost want to send my 4-year-old up the chimney to just like we've all got to pitch in because tomato ketchup's tripled in price. How there's so many strands. How can we, as a church, how can we teach things that are helpful? How can we support families, single people, couples? Where do we even start?
We need to stop people sending their children up chimneys.
Yeah.
You go on the tour of London.
Rubbish anyway.
If you go on the tour of London with Christian Heritage, they talk about people, Robert Rakes or whoever it was who stopped children going up chimneys. Shaftesbury, Lord Shaftesbury. Maybe he was called Robert Rakes as well. But besides that, I think we've probably got a lot to do, in the sense I don't think we're doing this perfectly well, because I think we're hesitant about talking about male and female roles beyond the very basic headline male headship teaching. I think we're good in our kinds of churches and the sort of people who'll be listening to this. I think we're pretty good on teaching male headship and complementarianism, leadership in the household, leadership in church. I think we're not so good at drilling down a bit further and thinking, okay, without being stereotypical, like, the woman should always do the finances and the men should always put the rubbish out, we're sort of shying away from that. But I think we end up saying virtually nothing, to be fair, about, okay, what does it look like, man, to lead your family, kind of at a real kind of ground level? How will you care? And I think we probably reap what we sow, in the sense that a number of kind of millennials and Generation X kind of men are perhaps not quite sure what leadership looks like. They've got the kind of theology, but maybe not drilled down far enough. I'm probably doing a disservice to all of those men. But I think that, if I'm confused, I'm sure they're confused a bit as well.
And equally on the same. And I think partly because we end up playing stereotypes. So that's the hard thing. And I think, teaching from the front, that difference is good and difference is diverse. I think, we're trying to push that message across, that actually, men and women will come across, there's a range of how that's expressed. But interestingly, looking to teach Titus 2 this week, and that whole area, ultimately at the end of the day, is you teach older men, you teach younger women, and they then teach the younger men and the younger women. Yeah. And so now the way you really begin to tackle this is discipleship. It's drawing alongside where that is modelled. And increasingly, what we're seeing, you'll have generations who are coming through who haven't had, necessarily come from Christian families, have come from broken families. So they've not seen it in their households. And so therefore, we've got to be even more active in kind of discipling and working out, okay, actively older women, older men, taking their responsibility seriously to disciple younger men, younger women. And it's not just the role of the leaders of the church, it's the role for everyone in the church. And when you think, Titus is talking older would have been 40 upwards, you're talking, that's quite a fair few people in the life of the church who could be significantly investing in the life of another, that is then helping them to work out and express, okay, what does it look like to be a godly woman? What does it look like to be a godly? And we are blessed in this country with resources that will help us to think through those issues. And on one level, it's just a little bit more of, we need to think that through. And it's going to be muddy because it's going to look different for different people. And that's why you need discipleship, because we can preach it from the front, but you can only keep it at that level. What it needs is then worked out in, okay, what does it look like in my marriage? Because, husbands and wives, just how they interact will be different across couples, how they work it out, the different skills, sets, personalities, all of those things will come into it. but there will be some principles that then need working out much more closely.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Thinking about interacting with non-Christians, I've got a number of friends who are kind of, I think, frustrated with feminism. They're not Christians, but they're starting to be like, actually, feminism has done us a disservice as women. And I want to say to them, what the Bible has to offer, how the Bible sets things out is so much better. But how do we have that conversation? And also, maybe this is a separate question, but I'm going to lump it in together for time. Lots of people would say, and probably you've both probably had this question from people over the years, like, hasn't the church or the Bible historically persecuted women? Doesn't the Bible downplay women, treat them badly? Doesn't the church do that? How do we have these conversations with our non-Christian friends?
I think we have to be honest that the church sometimes has, or not that you can really say the church and categorize everyone, but people in the church have at times, have gone beyond what the Bible talks about. And as Mark was saying earlier, the fact that the Bible is actually revolutionary in its time in terms of the dignifying of women, both in everything from, it's not just a New Testament thing, even, the whole inclusion of women in the whole story of the Old Testament, including the creation, not least. And that clear statement about both being made in the image of God right at the beginning. It's all countercultural of the time. Sorry, this is probably a more complicated answer you'd give to your non-Christian friend. You have to be honest that times the church have turned what was a good thing into a kind of, a power-broking thing of holding sway over women as a sort of whole class of people. So we have to be honest about that, but it wasn't necessarily all men in the church in all times, and that the Bible sets out both an equality but a diversity of men and women, equality in status and created order, and in terms of their redeemed status. But it does talk about difference in role, and that finds its expression. And I think that the kind of clash point is, okay, so what does that look like, and is it good? And in the end, we may not be able to convince people that it's good, but I think we have to believe that it's good, in the sense that we experience it being a good thing. And I think it's part of our witness is to be much more confident that God's way is good, and that there isn't this kind of arbitrary, man-woman lottery thing. Oh, you got born a woman. Somebody. Yeah. Anyway, I won't say the quotation because it's a bit base, but someone once quoted me about winning a particular kind of lottery because of being a white male, and I think that's a kind of a misunderstanding. As though the great achievement of a woman would be to be like a white male, in terms of power and everything else. That's not really what will make us happy. What will make us happy will be fitting into God's roles, which is not subservience, but it is difference. That's a really long-winded answer for your non-Christian friend, but I think just keep going back to it's a good thing for not the patronizing, but the protection of women and children within families, is going with God's order, and within that context to flourish, and sometimes to be better at a whole load of things than your husband. It's not about degree of gifting and all those things. It's a context in which you flourish in God's order.
Yeah. I wonder if there's this misconception that the Bible's full of rules about women can't do this, and this, which maybe I would... it's not something I've said, but maybe next time I have this conversation, which might be in an hour's time on school run, to encourage them to read it and say, actually, that there's very few things the Bible says women can't do. And actually, there's so much freedom, possibly more freedom than what feminism would have to offer, that, you can play out your responsibilities in many different ways.
But interesting, I think it's also taken a step further. It's where there are boundaries, actually it's for the good, as Graham's been saying. It allows for the wife to flourish, for the woman to thrive. It's not about kind of somehow subjecting them to, a life of, servitude is a life of actually, this is the way to flourish and thrive. This is a better story than what the world is telling.
Yeah, for sure. I think we should do another episode another time, maybe about roles and responsibilities, particularly within the home, within the church. I think that would be fun.
And dealing with all the questions, comments that this episode has produced.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. If you have got questions, tell us. We would love to answer them. We'd love to get Graham to answer them specifically. I'm just nominating you because you were not looking at the screen. Yeah, you can email us ordinary@cchh.org.uk if you've got questions, because we'd love to hear them. Have either of you got any good books or resources to recommend on these type of topics?
Mark normally has.
Yeah, I think you've got. I keep wanting to call it your sex book, but Graham, that you've mentioned it a few times. But it was about the sexual revolution.
It's the I can't remember what it's called. The Case Against. That's how it begins. The Case Against the Sexual Revolution is an excellent book by a lady who's not a Christian.
Oh, it's not a Christian book, okay.
No, but it's fascinating.
You'd recommend it?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, okay.
Apart from a little bit of foul language in a few sections, it's really, really good because it ends up saying, listen to your mother, is one chapter. Okay. Marriage is good is the other chapter.
Okay.
The two concluding chapters from a non-Christian feminist saying sexual revolution, feminism has done nothing good for women. Actually, marriage is much better. It's the best situation for a woman to be in, a good marriage, which is fascinating and just helpful. We don't build our whole confidence in God on the fact that someone writes a book, but it just helps when every now and then you get a kind of corollary of, oh yeah, it is good. And I can see that. So that is a good book.
I think I'd recommend two. One is Graham Byner's new book, Embracing Complementarianism with Jane Tuher. So Byner and Tuher. This it's just comes from our kind of stable, trying to work through how we do roles. Doesn't have all the answers, but it gets you thinking. I think Fitzpatrick and Schumacher's book, Celebrating the Value of Women. It's a really helpful book. Is
that called Worthy?
Maybe Worthy. Is it called Worthy? Celebrating the Value of Women?
I believe it is.
That's the one. Worthy. That's what it's called.
I found that one a little aggressive, I have to say. But,
aggressive against women?
No, against
men.
Well, not against men, but against traditional teaching from churches.
Okay.
It would end up, I think, in traditional position of where
yeah, sure, it agrees with it, but I found it a bit aggressive in attacking the way that it's often taught, which I didn't know. But anyway, but it was good and helpful still.
And then there's Carrie Sandham's Different by Design would be another one.
That's good. I've read that book.
Would be another helpful. You've read Worthy as well, Graham. We read it as elders, but
did we?
Yeah.
Don't remember reading that. That's how. So I really don't remember reading it. But you sure I wasn't sick for those elders meetings?
I don't think so.
But there's the Sharon James book as well, which is good. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah. I know. I can see the picture's white. I can't think what it's called.
Yeah. I don't want to embarrass myself by looking behind and not be able to find it. I think it's next to Different by Design over on my bookshelf.
That's really helpful. It's like those people going to the library and say, "Oh, I'm looking for a book. It's got a blue cover," and the librarian has to.
God's Design for Women in an Age of Gender Confusion. That's what it's called.
Oh,
there you go.
I think she's done another book as well, which is a different title, but that's one a later book, more recent book, which drills down to some of the issues as well. So I've read that one too.
There we are, tons of books.
Not at elders' meetings. But I mean, they're all good. But I think in the end, you do have to work from principle down to kind of what does it look like. And as we said earlier, there's a bit of work to do. So talk amongst yourselves now, listeners, about how you're going to drill that down and land it.
In my early marriage, because I didn't grow up in a Christian home and hadn't been a Christian for many years when I got married, I think I read too many books because I was like, what does this look like? What does this look like? Because I'd never seen it. And I read so many books and there's so many conflicting things. And I got stuck in this mindset of, oh, when we go somewhere, my husband always has to be the one to drive. Which, I mean, I still haven't passed my driving test, so it always happens. But I think I got stuck in that kind of mindset for a while. So we can read too many books on this subject as well, I think.
Yeah, and then just in terms of, Kent Hughes, Barbara Hughes, godly men, godly women.
Yeah, those are good ones.
They're just helpful books in thinking about us as men, or us as men being godly in that role.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that they haven't been updated. Sorry, they haven't been outdated by lots of other books coming along that in a similar. It's almost like that was of a generation that would think about it, and we don't think about that quite so much.
Yeah,
interesting.
Because we're kind of fighting the theological battle at a higher level most of the time.
Yeah, trying to get people to want to be a godly man or a godly woman, as opposed to a godly person.
Yeah.
Which there are distinctions. We'll save that for a future episode. That'll be good.
Cool.
Right, I think we'll leave it there, everyone.